with an intro still pending, this is the ninth episode of the Mendez Movie Report Podcast for the week of June 22nd, 2026. I am your host, film critic, and namesake Louis A. Mendez. And on this episode, I will be reviewing Toy Story 5, taking a look at the Exodus of Los Angeles Productions. I react to the Academy expanding their board of governors. I cannot believe that we'll also be reacting to the news that the Grinch 2 is apparently in the works. I'll be paying tribute to two individuals that unfortunately we lost in the industry this past week. And I'll be looking at the latest box office news along with what's coming next to theaters and streaming, among plenty of other things. It's going to be a packed episode, so let's get straight to it. And without a shadow of doubt, the biggest news in film this past week was that we have a brand new Toy Story film in Toy Story 5, the latest from Pixar, just not that long ago since we got their last film, Hoppers, which I gave a pretty decent B plus review to. Um, Toy Story 5 came out. It's making bonkers money at the box office. We'll get to a little bit on that later. Um, but you know, my review for the film is available to read over at the Substack right now. But I'll be going through it right now just to make sure for anybody who missed out my thoughts on it, because I do believe, spoiler alert, that this is going to be up there among my favorite films of the year, as these Toy Story movies always seem to consistently be. Now, the plot is via letterbox. The plot is when Bonnie receives a lily pad tablet as a gift and becomes obsessed, Buzz, Woody, Jesse, and the rest of the gang's jobs become exponentially harder when they have to go head to head with the all new threat, the playtime. And my review is as follows. Let me get this out of the way. The first time I ever watched Toy Story was on New Year's Eve 1996. I'll never forget it. And it was actually my first theatrical experience that I had since moving from Puerto Rico to the States. It wasn't my first theatrical experience, period. That was Aladdin. But Toy Story was my first experience in the States. And I watched Toy Story 2 with my family 3 years after that. Then we saw Toy Story 3. I saw Toy Story 3 on a date with what would go on to be the future mother of my daughter 11 years after that. 9 years later came Toy Story 4, and now 7 years after that, I watched Toy Story 5 as a new father in his 30s. And in that way, it did make it perfect that this ended up being this year's big Father's Day weekend release. I've literally grown up with these movies. They've been there through different chapters of my life, from being a kid, adjusting to a new culture, to dating, to becoming a husband and father. In a strange way, they've aged right alongside me. Now, Pixar spent 3 decades turning a box of plastic toys into one of cinema's most profound examinations of growing up, letting go, and the universal desire to matter. And after the perfect emotional finality of Toy Story 3 and the more controversial and divisive epilogue of Toy Story 4, I went to Toy Story 5 wondering whether there was really anything left to say. Well, I am happy to report that I believe Pixar has done it again. Toy Story 5 leapfrogs into my list of the best films I've seen this year, and as of right now, it might even challenge Project Hail Mary for the current top spot. I have a couple of issues that keep me from putting it in the same tier as the franchise's absolute best, but this series continues to do something few franchises have managed to sustain over such a long period of time. It uses talking toys to tackle existential questions and the very human need for connection in ways that resonate just as deeply with adults as they do with children. It really is an incredible achievement that all five of these films have been as well received as they are. And granted, everybody's got their own opinion. I know Part Four has a lot of loud doubters. Actually, brought up Part Four somehow ended up getting brought up in the conversation with some with a friend of mine, and he says that he hates the film. He couldn't believe that I rated it as high as I did in my recent binging and rewatch of Toy Story movies. But I'm sorry, all the Toy Story movies are among my fave films of the year, and I've been thinking about it. I think the first one might actually be my number one film in 1995. Um, but what struck me immediately about this movie was how much this film feels like a return to the spirit of the original trilogy. Again, I'm a defender of Toy Story 4, but that movie largely functioned as a side adventure centered on Woody. Toy Story 5 brings the gang back together, at least what it can given we've lost voice actors through the decades, and restores the ensemble dynamic that made the first three films work so beautifully. It almost feels like a blend of the original film and Toy Story 2, balancing questions about self-worth and purpose with the inevitability of change and the uncomfortable reality that everyone, toys included, eventually faces a limited amount of time on this planet. That balancing act between fun and existential dread remains one of Pixar's greatest strengths. Younger audiences are going to find plenty to enjoy here. There are laughs, exciting sequences, and enough colorful personalities to keep kids entertained from beginning to end. But adults will recognize the deeper themes underneath. These films have always been about more than just toys. They've been about relations, they've been about belonging. They're about what happens with that thing that once defined your identity changes and you have to rediscover who you are. The film does something no previous entry has attempted and passes the baton from Woody to Jessie as the main focus of the story. It worked far better than I expected. Her arc ties strongly into elements established in Toy Story 2, making the payoff revisiting her origin story hit incredibly hard. It brings back memories of the painful montage from the second film when Jessie remembers being abandoned by her first kid, and it lands with just as much emotional weight. Even when the movie shifts away from Jesse, it still does a nice job with Woody and Buzz's side of the adventure, with the latter thankfully being rehabilitated after the clunky way he was rated in the previous installment. One of the few things people gripe about part four that I'm in agreement with. The new toys, or in some cases new devices, are also welcome additions. Chief among them is Smarty Pants, a potty training minigame voiced by Conan O'Brien, who ends up my personal MVP of the whole movie. He gets many of the funniest lines and consistently steals every scene he's in. And in a world increasingly dominated by screens and digital distractions, Toy Story 5 makes a surprising, poignant argument for imaginations and human connection through its main plot of the toys being replaced by a children's learning tablet in Lilypad. Without ever becoming preaching, the movie takes a stance on the importance of genuine interaction and creative play. There's a clear message that childhood is more than simply staring at devices and consuming content. It's about forming bonds, creating memories, and experiencing the world around you. Honestly, I almost wish the movie had gone even further. Some of its observations about technology and the effects it has on younger children are compelling enough that I wanted Pixar to lean harder into that aspect. The film makes this point, but I think there was room to take a more uncompromising stance about the dangers of replacing human connection with constant digital stimulation. Emotionally, though, the movie absolutely wrecked me. Um, Watching this 4 months into becoming a girl dad with my first Father's Day um, around the corner when I watched it. Obviously, it's come and gone since. It hit me in ways I wasn't prepared for. Um, there were three separate moments when I found myself in tears, just to be straight up. And parenthood is a funny way of changing how you experience stories, and suddenly all these themes about cherishing fleeting moments, preparing children to grow, and understanding that love often means accepting change landed with some devastating force. It reminded me why these movies have endured for so long. Every entry speaks differently depending on where you are in life. As a kid, these were funny adventures. As a teenager, they became stories about growing up. As an adult, they become reflections on purpose and mortality. And now, as a father, they resonate on yet another level entirely. That isn't to say I don't have reservations or gripes. If I'm ranking endings, I still think Toy Story 3 remains the perfect conclusion. There's an elegance and emotional completeness to that film that remains almost impossible to top. I understand why Pixar keeps returning to these characters because they continue finding worthwhile things to say. But part of me still believes that Andy handing over his toys was one of the most satisfying farewells in movie history. Another issue that has persisted as the franchise has grown larger is the problem of character overcrowding. Certain toys continue to get reduced to glorified cameos, and some longtime favorites barely impact the overall story. Um, again, though, we have lost some key voice actors through the decades. Uh, but that's been an issue since Toy Story 4, and it continues here. When you've accumulated this many beloved characters over 5 films, it's inevitable that some are going to get lost in the shuffle. But it does leave me wishing a few members of the gang had more meaningful roles. Those complaints aside, Toy Story 5 serves as another reminder of why Pixar at its best remains one of the great storytellers in Hollywood. The studio understands that animation doesn't have to choose between entertaining children and challenging adults. It can do both. It can make you laugh 1 minute and leave you contemplating life itself the next. More importantly, it understands something that these films have known since 1995, in that we all want to feel like we belong somewhere. We all want to matter to someone. We all fear being left behind. And somehow, after 5 movies, these stories still know how to speak to these anxieties in ways that feel timeless. I already want to see it again. So at my first viewing, and we'll see if maybe I calm down a little as by the end of the year. But at my first viewing, I want to give this an A plus. And just to recap, pros for Toy Story 5 has much more of the ensemble vibes of the first 3 films, rather than the side plot journey that the fourth film feels like. Like its predecessors, it's able to comfortably juggle an entertaining film with plenty for younger audiences and adults to enjoy. It takes a much needed stance on imagination and human bonding over just staring at screens. Continue to see emotional impact of using these toys to hit on themes of existentialism and belonging, and it left me in tears during several moments. The cons, I still feel like this franchise had the more perfect ending with part 3. The issue of regulating certain toys to shorter screen time and having no real impact to the story continues to be an issue as the franchise lasts longer. The movie could have taken an even more harsh stance against the problematic sides of having young kids using tech over connecting with the real world. Those are the cons at the end there. I forgot if I mentioned that those are the cons. But yeah, at the moment, and again, I'll see if I kind of like cool down from a high, and we'll see because I definitely am going to rewatch this. I give Toy Story 5 an A plus. I highly recommend this film. I absolutely think you should go out and seek it at the movie theater, even if it means at full price in the evening. Now, that being said, uh, let's take a look at this past weekend in new movies. And this past weekend's biggest release again was Toy Story 5, which you just heard my review for. And you can read my review over at my at the Substack MendezMovieReport.com. And the film was met with great reviews from both critics and audiences. Among critics, the film scored a 94% on Rotten Tomatoes and a 73 on Metacritic. Now that is a lower Metacritic score than all the other movies. I did see a little bit more gripes from critics with this one than a lot of like goodwill that I saw for part 4, which is a movie that's ended up being a little bit more debated about among audiences. Um, I do think that there were some critics that came in already ready to complain that this movie exists in the first place, which I get it, but I think people should always try to be more of good faith when coming into these movies. Among audiences, it scored a 95% on the popcorn meter, 3.8 on Letterboxd, which is that means that I think it's going to settle to being easily higher than the fourth film, which is in the low threes on Letterboxd, 7.7 on IMDb, and the rare A cinema score. Um, The movie ended up making over 300 million worldwide on opening weekend alone. So yeah, Pixar has another massive hit on their hand with this consistently great franchise. It does have a shot at getting up that $1 billion if it has the legs, and I do think it's going to have the legs, especially looking at what's coming up over the next few weeks. But Minions is not going to be anything to, you know, take lightly. So we'll see how that movie does in a couple weeks. A24's counter programming for Father's Day weekend was The Death of Robin Hood, which ended up receiving mixed and positive reactions from both critics and audiences. The weakest scores I've seen for a Michael Cernowski film yet. Among critics, it scored a 70% on Rotten Tomatoes and a 60 on Metacritic. Among audiences, it scored a 64% of the popcorn meter, a 3.1 on Letterboxd, a 6.4 on IMDb, and a lowly C plus cinema score. I haven't seen this one yet, but given that 2021's Pig was a near miss for my personal best self list, I really, really like that movie. And that 2024's A Quiet Place Day One was pretty decent in my eyes. I have the same kind of surprise by these divided reactions. They're not awful, even though that C plus cinema score is really bad. But man, this movie, which I thought could have been a bit of a sleeper hit, a movie that maybe can see on some best self lists in by the end of the year, not necessarily an awards player though. I mean, it does look like it's Cernowski's first divisive film. Again, I haven't seen it yet. Maybe I'll watch it and I'll love it, but um, we'll see. I have heard Hugh Jackman's great in the movie though. Um, uh, and I'm always up for seeing Hugh Jackman do more than just Wolverine. A film I didn't touch on last weekend, but that it's been getting some raves. Is the indie counter programmer Leviticus. The queer horror flick received great reviews from critics and solid enough audience scores. Among critics, it scored a 93% on Rotten Tomatoes and an 83 on Metacritic. Among audiences, it scored an 83% of the popcorn meter, a 3.8 on Letterboxd, and a 6.6 on IMDb. I will definitely be giving this one a look in due time. I've been told it's basically queer It Follows, and I thought It Follows was okay. I didn't fall in love with it as hard as other people did, so I'll be interesting to see how I feel about it. Um, we also got the straight to Netflix rom-com, Voicemails for Isabella, it's been getting some really solid critical notices and excellent audience scores, especially for these like straight to Netflix originals. Typically, these movies like get very, very mediocre, even downright bad audience scores. But among critics, it scored an 84% on Rotten Tomatoes, a 60 on Metacritic. Among audiences, 92% on the popcorn meter. Um, 3.7 on Letterbox, which is not bad for a straight to Netflix movie, 7.6 on IMDb. And I'm always down for a good romance. I'm a hopeless romantic, so I'll be catching up with this one sooner rather than later. I'm recording this on a Monday, so I'll definitely be checking this out over the next week. Um, and finally, we did also have the straight to Disney Plus comedy Never Change, which remember I accidentally thought was coming to Disney Plus earlier than it was, but it did finally come this past weekend. And it was met with less than enthusiastic reactions from both critics and audiences. Among critics, 17% on Rotten Tomatoes, 43 on Metacritic, based on the sample of just 3 reviews last I checked. I did catch this one last week, and I have to say I agree with the consensus. I found this to be a super forgettable lowbrow comedy. It was one of those movies that was definitely a bit of a chore to get through, and it's unfortunate because I thought that the premise could have been kind of fun, but yeah, unfortunately, I was not a fan of this, and a lot of people were not. So it looks like the biggest winners in terms of reception this past weekend were Toy Story 5 and of all things, Voicemails for Isabel and Leviticus. Now, that being said, what is coming up this next weekend in new movies? And how do you follow up back to back weekends that saw a new Spielberg blockbuster and a new Pixar sequel? Not just any Pixar sequel, but a Toy Story sequel. Well, Warner Brothers does it with the next chapter in James Gunn's DC Cinematic Universe, Supergirl. And the film's box office tracking has been a bit concerning given the success of Superman last year. Um, Even though some of the estimates that I saw actually are okay opening weekend numbers, um, there does seem to be an aura that Warner Brothers isn't pushing this as the event film that they probably should be. And look, for those who aren't aware, I was personally underwhelmed by last year's Superman, which ended a great streak I had with James Gunn's filmography. All three Guardians of the Galaxy movies were among my fave films of their year, especially the first two. The uh, Suicide Squad, this is a hot take for a lot of people, but I think it's his James Gunn's best movie, and I had it in the top 5 of 2021. I really, really enjoyed that movie, and I've rewatched it several times since then. Um, but unfortunately, Superman did not hit with me. I really just did not vibe with this, with Gunn making the decision to pull a Snyder and just drop us into this world, and just assume that the whole world is used to superheroes and all that stuff now. And I know people get tired of origin stories and all that stuff, but I don't like it's you can get away with not doing the origin story because there are some great, solid movies that don't do the origin story. Like the Batman is such a great movie and that doesn't do the origin story. But I felt like by that by doing that and leading into some of the joke, into the tone of Superman and such, I struggle with that film. And I know that's a hot take because there were a lot other people that would really like that movie. I actually knew at least one person that said it was their favorite movie of last year. Um and but this one, Supergirl, is going to be directed by it is directed by Craig Gillespie, who's he has this jukebox soundtrack aesthetic. That's something that I've always admired and have fun with. Um, though I am concerned in that his last movie, Dumb Money, I found incredibly frustrating. It was easily the worst film that I've seen from him. Whereas before he had some really fun movies. I Tonya is definitely one of my faves of 2017. Um, and I have been getting concerned over some of these early reactions that are coming in. Now, my market doesn't have a press screen for this one, but rest assured, I will be watching and reviewing this by week's end. But yeah, I really hope this one surprises me, but at the moment, I'm not feeling great about it. But hey, if you're excited for this, if you're a big DC fan, if you were a fan of Superman, more power to you. We'll see how people react to that one. Um, A24 will be counter programming with the dark relationship comedy The Invite, which did receive raves at Sundance, and the buzz is that A24 thinks is a potential Dark Horse Awards contender. The premise does have me a bit nervous because like it's basically just this. The whole premise is basically supposed to be that this dinner party goes really bad, especially from one particular couple. And I'm not really into breakup movies, and I have no clue how this one's gonna play out. But I'll be making the time to catch up with this week if I can. I'll definitely catch up to it eventually. Like there's too much like love and excitement that I'm seeing from some people about this movie. I got to give it a try. Um, but I'm very hit and miss with these kind of movies, so we'll see. But there is some legitimate potential buzz for this awards buzz for that one. Another indie counter programming option is going to be Couture, which is a French drama starring Angelina Jolie as a filmmaker who's giving a problematic medical diagnosis, which is going to hint is going to hint at some medical issues that Jolie herself has had to face. The film received mixed reactions at last year's fall festivals, but I am curious to check it out. As a big admirer of her acting ability, I've actually been offered an online screening of the movie. We'll also be getting two straight to Netflix releases. The first being Little Brother, a buddy comedy that's been receiving some aggressive marketing. Both Eric Andre and John Cena have been hitting the PR trail hard, so it'll be interesting to see if Netflix can turn that push into a breakout hit. I don't know, man. I'm typically with these kind of movies, they don't necessarily end up being the best reviewed films, but hey, we'll see. I actually thought Ricky Stenicki was a okay movie. So, the other Netflix release is In the Hand of Dante, a film that received some truly awful reactions at last year's Fall Festival, and again at Tribeca. And if you remember, I mistakenly said 2 weeks ago that this was coming out to Netflix then, but this is the actual release week. It turned out I got confused with the fact that it was showing at Tribeca. I've heard nothing but bad things about this movie, but I'm just too curious with the premise and everything. So, it's I gotta check this movie out, and I gotta see, is it really as bad as people have been saying it is? So that's what we got to look forward to this upcoming weekend. It's Supergirl, and then it's up to you on what indie counter programming or what Netflix uh movie you want to check out. All right, now we can get to the recent film industry news that caught my attention over the last week. And something that really caught my attention was a recent Variety article from Gene Mattis. I hope I got that name right, on the Exodus of Productions from Los Angeles, and struck my fancy. I highly recommend reading it. And basically the title of the article is like this, and again, this is from Variety. I'm going to link to it on the show notes. um Hollywood's mass exodus, why film and TV production is fleeing LA, and what can be done about it. um and the this what the article starts it with. Baywatch was a staple of low budget first run syndication in the 90s, as natural to Los Angeles as David Hasselhoff's chest hair, and as defining of the city in that era as the OJ trial and the Sunset Strip. By the time it ended its run in 1999, it had become too costly to produce at a profit. But the show's red trunks and swimsuits returned to LA lifeguard towers in March of this year, like an endangered pelican reintroduced to its native habitat. The Fox reboot was hailed as a triumph for the industry's hometown, which is suffering through a long slide in production activity. Governor Gavin Newsom bragged that the show was back where it belongs at a cost to the state of $21 million. Soon, however, the producers ran into obstacles. Officials from the County Beaches and Harbors Department and the California Coastal Commission told them they couldn't park their trucks overnight, light fires, or drive on the sand. We're lifeguard show, Baywatch co creator Greg Bonin remembers saying. What do you mean we can't drive a truck on the beach? Suddenly, the show was at risk of becoming the wrong kind of symbol. This one, a victim of California's tangle of regulations, no one in power, not Newsom or LA Mayor Karen Bass, wanted to read the headlines about Baywatch bailing out of Los Angeles. When elected leaders were summoned to the Fox lot to smooth things over, the show held all the leverage. After a while, you have to sit down with the right people and say, guys, do we want to have this show here or not? Bonan says. Los Angeles has been the world's entertainment capital for 100 years and still has unmatched concentration of talent and infrastructure. But in the age of globalization, with easy international travel and communication, the city is losing its edge. Everything costs more in LA, starting with labor, due to high cost of living and elaborate union agreements. Other states and countries have developed crew bases of their own and are more solicitous of producers' needs and offer more generous incentives. Producers are also under pressure from the audience to deliver even more spectacular experiences. Creating a premium product at a price often means going overseas. These trends have been underway for 20 or 30 years, but since the end of the streaming bubble in 2022, America has lost 73,000 production jobs two-thirds of them in Los Angeles, bringing the issue of foreign competition to a rapid boil. In the chaotic race for LA mayor, the candidates have clashed over who lost Hollywood. At a debate in May, council member Nithya Raman accused Bass of failing to cut red tape. That's what happened in Baywatch, she said. The city and county weren't talking to each other. Spencer Pratt, the reality star who, thankfully, that's my addition there, thankfully conceded last week, bemoaned the sorry state of California's incentive program. Even Massachusetts has better tax credits than Hollywood. The contenders for governor are also battling to show that they can revive the industry with the right package of incentives. Newsom doubled the state program to $750 million in 2025. Everyone seems to agree it should be more, maybe a lot more, and that it should cover above the line salaries for actors, writers, and producers. It's my understanding, well, quote, in my understanding, California's rebate is one of the least beneficial for anybody who is financing motion pictures and television, unquote, says Charles Roven, co founder of Atlas Entertainment and producer of Oppenheimer and Wonder Woman. It's capped and it has no above the line, quote unquote, there. But the state can only do so much to compete with the 81 countries that have embraced the filming as an economic development tool. The UK alone spent 2.2 billion on film and TV subsidies in 2024, and national incentives are often stacked on top of local rebates. California, quote unquote, went into this knife fight without a weapon, and now folks are bringing guns, says Xavier Becerra, the Democratic gubernatorial candidate, who is the favorite to succeed Newsom. I go further to just favorite. He is a heavy, heavy favorite. As she runs for re-election, Bass has to walk a fine line between projecting confidence in the city's ability to retain production and lobbying for more federal help for Hollywood. I don't feel like we're going to lose our industry, Bass says, noting that studios and networks are still grappling with the business changes wrought by the streaming revolution. Quote, when all of that settles, I feel confident that we can maintain our industry. Once a pipe dream, the idea of a federal film subsidy now seems like a real possibility. In order to save this industry in America, we need to be competitive with tax credits, says Senator Adam Schiff, the California Democrat who is working on introducing an incentive bill in Congress. We have a lot of our influence around the world as a result of American film and television. We don't want to lose that soft power, he says. Advocates warn that unless the U.S. responds to foreign subsidies, Hollywood is at risk of becoming Detroit, which has bled jobs as automakers pursue long wage labor and generous incentives in other states and abroad. This is supposed to be the film capital of the world, said Noel Steinman. Or Stamen, I don't know. I told you, folks, I'm horrible with names. A co-founder of the grassroots group Stay in L.A. at a rally for Ramon's campaign. It should be the cheapest and easiest place to film. In fact, it is the most cumbersome and the most expensive. That cannot continue. If we don't do something quickly, this is going to become the next Detroit. Mike Miller, vice president of the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees, was raised in Cleveland. He also sees a parallel. I watched the demise of steel and rubber and automotive manufacturing as I grew up, he says. This is identical in many ways. We have an undeclared trade war that our government is standing by and watching happen. Now, I'm not going to read the entire article, but it definitely goes on there quite a bit. And to talk about other examples, some of the proposals that people have brought up, I highly, highly suggest that if you're interested in knowing about this a little bit further, you read this article. Again, I'm linking to the show notes. I get into my weekly digest. And hat tip to Gene Mattis for writing this great piece. Look, this is not a political show. This is a podcast about movies. So I'm not going to get into about what my own personal philosophies on this are. I'm definitely more of a capitalist. But there is something to be said about investing in your city. There's a reason that these cities invest in having sports stadiums there, and how that's paying off for them now with things like the World Cup, WrestleManias, big concert series and stuff like that. That brings money into those cities' economies. Los Angeles is gonna have to figure out a way not to lose these productions. We like to just say Hollywood when referring to the industry, when in reality there's plenty of things going on outside of Hollywood in the industry. I mean, like, um, you know, Georgia has developed a lot of filming over there. New Orleans, Florida. There's more being shot overseas. Things being shot overseas. Um, Hollywood just doesn't have the grip that it used to have. Aside from obviously that's where most of the award shows are and such, and a lot of the big studios are nested there. Um, this is definitely a problem that's going to have to be addressed, or before you know it, these production companies will have, they will have disappeared. They will have left LA. And I honestly can't blame them if they have to do it. Now, I will say, like, there is some conversation to be had about some things that I just read in that article. Like, I don't know if I'm that comfortable with trucks running through beaches, but it is what it is. That's what happens when you try to shoot on location, and it's definitely something to keep an eye out in regard to the sort of home of the industry as we know it here in America, because the history of film actually basically starts overseas, not here in America. Even though we were able to dominate and have dominated the conversation on film, which is a lot of those things in World War II. But I'm not getting into my. I'm not here to teach you film history, okay? But yeah, I think it would be very, very interesting to keep an eye on that, and I really hope that some of this new blood coming in has some good ideas on how to save Los Angeles and Hollywood in general. And per Variety by Clayton Davis, the Academy has chosen a new set of governors for its board of governors. Obviously, some notable additions include Guillermo del Toro and Chris Bowers. And I'd highly recommend reading Davis's piece on the expansion of the board. He really went into detail with this, which apparently now we'll see branches have three governors representing them. I'll read a little bit of the article, but I do want encourage you to check it out for yourself. I will be linking to it on the show notes like I did with the other Variety article. But it reads here, the headline from Variety: Guillermo del Toro, Chris Bowers, and more elected to expand 60-member Film Academy Board of Governors. The Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences has announced the newly elected Board of Governors for the 2026 to 2027 term year. The new board is comprised of a mixture of new faces to the board, like director Guillermo del Toro and composer Chris Bowers, returning incumbents like actor Lou Diamond Phillips and executive Hannah Minghella, and familiar names rejoining after hiatus, including animation documentary legends Bonnie Arnold and Roger Ross Williams. The new term also ushers in a structural change. Under a bylaws amendment approved by the board in February, all 19 Academy branches will now have 3 branch elected governors apiece, adding seats to the animation production and technology and short film branches. The change adds 5 branch elected seats to the board, bringing the total to 60 industry figures sitting on the Academy's vital group. To stagger the terms, governors in those 3 branches were elected this year to 1, 2, or 3-year terms, with the process reverting to the standard 1 governor per branch 3-year cycle in 2027. And the article goes on to talk about other basically it lists out all of the board members basically, but then it goes on to later say Um, as a result of the election, the board is composed of 47% women and 32% members from underrepresented communities based on self-reporting. Governors, including the board elected governors at large, may serve up to 2 3-year terms, consecutive or non-consecutive, followed by a 2-year hiatus, after which eligibility eligibility, what's up with me right now, renews for up to 2 more terms for a lifetime maximum of 12 years. A term of fewer than 3 years served by governor elected in 2026 branch election will not count against those limits. Um Okay, and again, you can read the article to get even more like insider details on how this works. And again, I'm gonna link to it. Hat tip to Clay and Davis for writing about the entire process and what all this means. And if anyone's wondering, like, okay, but what does this matter? Does this affect the race or anything like that? I should point out that a lot of these governors go on to wield a lot of influence and respect. I remember noticing that Ruthie Carter was a governor of the costumes branch, I believe, going into the 2022 Oscars when she pulled off that moderate upset over Elvis, um, winning the Oscar for Black Panther: Wakanda Forever. And I think that does matter. I think there are people in the academy, especially now that you're going to see these branches probably have a little bit more power over who wins, given that there you have people just skipping some of these categories because they won't watch, or at least even admit to try, or even lie in some cases about watching some of these category nominees. The interesting one to me the most is the expansion of short film representation, considering that I do think ABC was really pushing to get those short films out of the broadcast. I don't think that's happening now that we have YouTube taking over here soon. I just thought it was an interesting piece of information to keep an eye on. Guillermo del Toro getting into is very interesting, considering that he's gone from a guy that had a bit of a spotty record on Academy recognition. Now, ever since Shape of Water, he's been pretty consistently getting recognition from the Academy. So again, I'll link to the article, but yeah, the Academy didn't just grow its membership; it even grew its board of governors. And talking about the awards conversation, Ryan Gosling will be honored with the 2026 American Cinematheque Award, which isn't a really major predictor of the awards viability for performer or director, depending on the given season. However, coming off the honor going to eventual Best Actor winner Michael B. Jordan, it does highlight my continued belief that Project Hail Mary remains a strong Best Picture contender. I have seen some that have been trying to make the case that the movie's already fading from the conversation. But I got to tell you, these audience scores, some of these best of the half year lists I've seen, they suggest otherwise. And the honor for Gosling will likely be used by Amazon to help keep the campaign alive. I am telling you, I would not give up on Project Hail Mary right now. I think that's ridiculous that people are starting to do that. These audience scores are not nothing. Amazon will be re releasing the movie again throughout the year. Amazon is hell bent on not missing the boat like they did last year with the disaster that happened with After the Hun, basically being dead on arrival overnight after it got seen. And I do think this is going to be a really, really good sign for the movies awards. Of course, if you're a big Ryan Gosling fan, you're happy for him too to get this award. And I mean, look, I think it's generally well deserved. I wouldn't say I'm a massive Gosling fanboy. I was in the minority that didn't even have on my ballot for Barbie a couple years ago. But hey, he's great in Project Hail Mary. Project Hail Mary is so far my favorite movie of the year. If this helps that awards campaign, I'm all for it. And I can't believe I'm talking about this. I cannot believe I'm talking about this. I would call you crazy even just a week ago doing the last podcast episode if I said I was going to talk about this. But somehow the Grinch has returned. I was dismayed to see that it looks like we are getting very close to a The Grinch 2. In fact, there's some reports that may have even been greenlit now with Ron Howard and Jim Carrey set to return. And the original 2000 film, it kind of remains this hotly debated film among cinephiles. I know some people who really, really don't like that movie. They can't stand it. And I know some, particularly millennials, who hold it close to their hearts as this Christmas season favorite watch, one of their fave films of 2000. Actually, funny story, The Grinch is the first ever movie I watched on DVD. Like, I remember my dad bought a DVD in Christmas of 2001, because back then, if you were a Christmas movie and you came out to theaters, even if you didn't do great at the box office, they weren't coming out with you on VHS or DVD until a year later, because nobody was going to buy a Christmas movie in the summer. That was, I always got a kick out of that. But it was like around Christmas 2001, The Grinch was out on on VHS and DVD, and my dad bought a DVD, and to test it out, he went to Blockbuster, which was still around at the time, and rented the Grinch DVD. Um, and you know, I really should rewatch the movie. I remember liking the movie. I don't think I adore it to the levels other people do, but we'll see when I get to revisit 2000 as a whole and log it on Letterbox. Um, but even regardless, I just don't see what good can come from forcing a sequel to this. Um, I was listening to Next Best Picture podcast, and Will Mavity brought up a really good point. Like, okay, the Grinch has been redeemed. Now what? Like this just we were having an issue, and I commented about this about another movie that was announced on Twitter today, as I record this on a Monday evening. We have this issue. I think we're now, instead of the lazy, let's go for cape, quote unquote, cape shit for these big studios. They're just going for nostalgia plays and nostalgia slop, and I think this is another example of that. Like, I just don't, again, I don't see what can come from forcing a sequel. To me, this just continues to and that's another thing. It continues the depressing descent of Ron Howard's filmography in the later years of his directing output. I remember when this dude was making some legitimately great, or at least halfway decent films. I mean, some of his earlier stuff from like the late 90s to early 2000s are among my favorite films of those years. But lately, the guy has had such a, and I don't even like necessarily hate his movies of late. Like, even Hillbilly Elegy, as awful as J.D. Vance's age, since that movie has come out. Like, I thought that movie was okay. I thought his last movie was okay. But man, he really, it's not. I wouldn't say it's necessarily Robert Zemeckis levels of falling off, but it comes close. And I just really do not understand what on earth is the point of doing this. But hey, I just gave a good review to Toy Story freaking 5. Maybe they'll prove me wrong. I hope they prove me wrong, but I really don't understand any point in doing the Grinch 2. And speaking of bizarre potential projects, Sean Penn is apparently set to direct a January 6th film starring Bradley Cooper as a police officer caught up in the events of that day. Uh, Look, Sean Penn is an outstanding actor, but he is no Clint Eastwood. And Bradley Cooper, when it comes to directing, um, he's not Eastwood or Cooper. Heck, I wouldn't even say he's Jesse Eisenberg either. Like, I mean, I feel like Eisenberg, after that dud of a first film, is starting to really catch. He's really starting to come into his own. I have hope for how he's becoming as a director. So I can't hold my breath that this is going to be anything special. But given the subject matter and the time that we live in, I just feel like it'd be nice to have a more better director at the helm with this, and apparently he might even be helping write it. But hey, Bradley Cooper in the lead role, he might end up saving this and be at least halfway decent. But yeah, I do not know about this. The only thing that doesn't make this the most bizarre announcement that I've heard of in movies of late is the fact that we're still apparently gonna get a Grinch too. And I unfortunately once again have to address some losses that we had in the industry this past week. I really hope I don't butcher her name here. Davy Chase, who voiced Lilo in the millennial classic Lilo and Stitch. She portrayed that creepy videotape girl in The Ring, and she provided the English dub for Chichiru or Chichiro in Spirited Away. She tragically passed away at just 35 years old. Apparently, suffering because she was suffering from meningitis, blood infections, and sepsis. I mean, God Almighty, talk about a triple hitter there. Following hospitalization for malnutrition and extreme weight loss. So I don't think this story's gonna go. I think we're gonna find out some disturbing, unfortunately, some disturbing things here. Because not you're showing up to the hospital. You apparently have extreme weight loss. You're malnourished. Like there's an unfortunate tragedy there to be told. Um, and I can't claim to be a massive fan of the film she was best known for. I know a lot of millennials are massive fans of Lilo and Stitch, but like my brother thinks it's one of the greatest Disney animated movies ever made and all that. I'm not among those folks. I'm not a big fan of The Ring, even the original Japanese film. I don't love Spirited Away, but look, regardless of that, these are classics to a lot of people, and she left a hell of a legacy given that even in her short time here on this planet, she will be part of a legacy of movies that really hit hard for a lot of people, particularly people my age and her age, millennials. Lilo and Stitch, The Ring, Spirit Away. And um hearing that someone only 2 years younger than me suddenly died is always jarring. May she rest in peace. And really, really a sad story that came out this past week. Um, really, really sad. It's really unfortunate whatever led to her being malnourished like that and leading to this unfortunate, untimely death. And he was more of a TV guy than a movie guy, but we did also lose James Burrows at the age of 85. So no big tragedy here. It's just unfortunately his time was up. And I just wanted to quickly highlight him because the man gave us some of the greatest sitcoms of all time, including my personal favorite television show ever, Frasier, as well as his predecessor, Cheers. May he rest in peace, and I thank him for helping create so many classics, including again my absolute all-time favorite shows. You guys know I'm not a really big TV guy, but I can easily binge watch Frasier like nothing. I've actually I think I've rewatched that show from start to finish like 3 times now. I love that show. I love Cheers, especially as things started to heat up after about 4 seasons. You know, rest in peace to James Burrows. All the love and honor to him for giving us absolute bangers that will be rewatched for decades to come. And I only had one thing that was also on my mind that I wanted to get out there that doesn't regard film. Father's Day 2026 came and went, and it was my first ever experience actually getting to be celebrated as a dad. And again, it is bizarre because at this same time last year, I had no clue I would ever be a dad. I did receive some great gifts, including a 4K copy of Ben Hur, one of my absolute all-time favorite movies, one of the greatest Best Picture winners ever. A cute custom children's book, a matching custom T-shirt, and a dad journal. We did keep things simple. Our only eating out was being at, getting some PDQ. And then I cooked steak for dinner. And by the way, I was surprised how many people decided to use their Father's Day lunch slash dinner on PDQ, which might say something about the economy we're dealing with right now. Um, it was simple, but it was also like just kind of like this nice dipping my toes in the water of what it's like being a dad on Father's Day. And hopefully we can go a little bit bigger next year. And I do hope all dads, whatever their circumstances in the role, I hope all you guys out there, all you fathers, had a great Father's Day this year. I definitely had a pretty nice one, and I'm hoping that there are many, many great Father's Day to come from here on out. And I think that wraps it up for this episode. And this week, we reviewed Toy Story 5, talked about the issue going on in Hollywood right now with productions, the Academy Award, the Academy expanding their board of governors and such. A lot of industry news, including the bizarre announcement that were made, unfortunate passings, tribute for Father's Day, which came and went. So now it's time to close it out for this week. And next week, be on the lookout because I will be talking about and reviewing Supergirl and, of course, responding to whatever is going on in the industry. It might end up being a deliberately shorter show. We'll see what happens because I do have to record and then turn right around and go to my screening of Minions and Monsters because Universal actually gives us Tampa folks screenings. No offense to my Orlando peeps, but it's ridiculous that you guys get all the screenings and we don't. Um, so look for that for next week. But until then, if you want to catch my work, see me on social media, go to mendezmoviereport.com. You can find me on all social media under Mendez Movie RPT. And if you want to email me, author lmendez at gmail.com, as in a writer, author lmendez at gmail.com. Until then, God bless. And do me a big favor, go and watch a great movie.